This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get free access to Nebula, the streaming platform built by all your favorite YouTubers, when you sign up for CuriosityStream at the link below. We live in a world dominated by the economic system known as capitalism. Private ownership of the means of production is the norm, giant multinational corporations have a greater GDP than entire countries, and we're currently witnessing the birth of a second Gilded Age, complete with modern-day robber barons and skyrocketing inequality and poverty. For the first time in 100 years, the United States is seeing a real resurgence in class consciousness and criticism of the status quo. We've seen record numbers of protests and rallies, low-wage workers are walking out and demanding better conditions, and the language of class struggle is finally beginning to seep back into the American consciousness. It would be absurd to look around and assert that everything is fine, that capitalism is providing a good life and opportunities for the average person, when every quality of life metric is in decline for everyone except the top few percent. And yet, as always, there are those who are unwilling to acknowledge the reality of the situation, and instead fall back on ignorant or bad faith arguments to defend a failing economic system. In this episode, we're going to look at one argument in particular, the claim that without capitalism, there would be no innovation. Let's start with the assertion itself. Without capitalism, there would be no innovation. What does this imply? It suggests that the sole motivating factor for anyone to do anything is money, the profit motive. It suggests that the only reason society has advanced is because of capitalism. This is quite the claim. And, as we'll see shortly, it is incorrect in both regards. Let's start with the first point, the profit motive as the motivating factor. Once upon a time, people produced food not to sell, but to consume themselves and stockpile for the future. No money exchanged hands, the end. Of course, this is an overly simplistic argument. But people who make claims about the efficacy of the profit motive should remember that capitalism is a fairly recent development in the grand scheme of things. But leaving thousands of years of human history aside, even in the modern capitalist era, there have been countless examples of people choosing to innovate not because they lusted after money, but because it was the right thing to do. One of the more well-known examples is Jonas Salk. Though it was declared eradicated in the Americas in 1994, polio was once a major threat to children around the world. Polio is an infectious disease that attacks the central nervous system and often leads to paralysis. During the first half of the 20th century, what began as localized polio outbreaks had reached epidemic levels in North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And in 1952, the US faced the worst outbreak it had ever experienced, infecting at least 58,000 people, killing 3,145, and leaving over 21,000 more with varying degrees of paralysis in a single year. Some of the worst affected could no longer breathe by themselves and needed to be placed in what was called an iron lung. This horrible disease brought unspeakable suffering to children around the world. But thanks to a team of innovative scientists led by Dr. Jonas Salk, today polio is little more than a bad memory. Starting in 1948, Dr. Salk dedicated the next 7 years of his life to understanding how polio worked and how we could fight it. In 1955, when the news of Salk's new and effective vaccine was made public, he was hailed as a hero and a miracle worker. Salk became a household name. He could have taken advantage of this newfound fame and made a fortune on the vaccine, but he refused to patent his creation.
Who owns the patent on this vaccine?
Well, the people, I would say. There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?
Jonas Salk chose not to patent the vaccine in order to maximize its availability around the world. By 1959, 90 countries were making use of the polio vaccine, and by 1994, the disease had been completely eradicated in North America. When people first learn about Jonas Salk, many of them are shocked that he chose not to profit from his creation. It's an understandable reaction when the norm in the pharmaceutical industry is criminal price gouging, where executives rake in tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars every year. But if people like Jonas Salk can exist in even the most lucrative fields, then the profit motive is not the only motivating factor that exists. And this is only one example. If you look around, you'll find many more. Those who benefit from capitalist exploitation will try to convince you that people won't be motivated to improve the world without a financial incentive. But that's just not the case. But enough about this first point. Let's move on to the second one, the claim that society has only advanced because of the profit motive. Capitalist apologists have a tendency to view the private sector as some godlike entity that operates with 100% efficiency, is the sole driver of innovation, and always acts in the best interest of the people. This is rarely, if ever, the case. In fact, the private sector hardly ever drives innovation at all. Take the iPhone, for example. Fans of capitalism love to say things like, you tweet about socialism from your iPhone, but you wouldn't have that iPhone without capitalism. That's a little disingenuous, to say the least. If you look at the iPhone, or just about any modern phone really, you'll see that very nearly every critical part was developed with public funding. Microchips, GPS, accelerometers, image sensors, touchscreens. These were all projects funded by the public, either via the government or the military. And it's not just phone components. Nearly every aspect of modern-day life was funded and created not by the private sector, but by the public sector. Satellites, the internet, public schools, national parks, waste management, water infrastructure. Things we rely on and take for granted today are the result not of this supposed capitalist innovation, but of public programs. The private sector rarely drives innovation. Even the internet's favorite faux futurist, Elon Musk, is only able to pursue his vanity projects because of billions of dollars of government funding. Okay, so if capitalism isn't driven by innovation, what is the driving factor? It's pretty simple, really. Capitalism is driven by the profit motive, not by some innate drive to innovate. If something is profitable, it will be produced, which leads to the proliferation of cheap, useless garbage like 30 different kinds of poop emoji pool floats and tens of thousands of copycat phone cases. If we take the pharmaceutical industry again, instead of prioritizing new, critically important medicine, the profit motive incentivizes the production of slight variations of existing drugs in order to extend their patents. In this way, capitalism actually prevents innovation by demanding that funding be allocated towards the most profitable ventures, not the ones that will do the most good or drive humanity forward. But this isn't the case everywhere. If we take a country like Cuba, where healthcare is nationalized, we see a completely different approach. Since they're not beholden to the profit motive, Cuba has made astounding medical advances even with a drastically lower GDP than the US, not to mention decades of crippling US sanctions. Cuban doctors are renowned the world over, and during the pandemic, they not only easily handled their own outbreak, they also sent their doctors and medical supplies to countries who needed them most, all without the expectation of any kind of profit. Again, capitalism will not produce results unless there is a profit to be made. Because of this, hundreds of thousands of Americans continue to suffer, while countries like Cuba make accommodations for humanitarian crises, with no expectation of profit. But let's move on to something a little more current. I'm sure most of you have seen the viral pictures of these signs put up at fast food restaurants and other low-wage businesses. Workers have finally realized that they have some bargaining power, at least for the time being. If you're unfamiliar with the situation, here's a brief synopsis. Low-wage workers are quitting or not coming back to work because they can make more money on unemployment. This has led to a number of managers putting out signs saying that no one wants to work anymore and suggesting it's some kind of moral failing. Here's the thing. I don't know a single person who would want to work a low-wage, miserable fast food job. The idea that people would want to toil their life away dealing with awful customers and doing thankless work is absurd. This supposed American value of working for work's sake is a myth. It's nothing more than propaganda by those who own the businesses. Think about it. If you were offered the opportunity to not spend 10 hours a day slaving over a grill or staring blankly at spreadsheets and still make enough money to live, would you take it? Of course you would. You could spend that time doing work you actually enjoy, or finding a job that pays better. That's the thing capitalists never mention. Most humans do have an inclination to work. They just don't want to work for you. There's a difference between work, being productive with your time and skills, and the modern American conception of work, tedious labor people are obligated to accept for fear of starvation and poverty. Now, this trend of people refusing to work low-wage jobs is a prime opportunity for capitalists to innovate. They could come up with a way to make their jobs more enticing to would-be workers. Have they done that? No. In fact, they've already run to the government to beg them to fix their problem for them. And because all American administrations are increasingly corporatized, we've gotten this: a threat that if anyone refuses a job offer, no matter how demeaning, degrading, and miserable, no matter how low the wages, they will be kicked off unemployment. So much for at-will employment. Capitalists can't stand the thought of workers having any bargaining power, and so, like with everything, they demand help from the government. Capitalism doesn't innovate. It only pursues the next fistful of dollars. It asks, where is there a profit to be made? It never considers the use value of what it produces, only the profits it can make. And so we continue to receive mountains of cheap products that will fail in a few months. The profit motive is not the driver of innovation. It stifles innovation. It prevents funds from being used in a way that would actually benefit the world, instead funneling that money into pointless, often incredibly destructive projects. When there is innovation in America, it is in spite of capitalism, not because of it. It's because people like Jonas Salk realize that some things are more important than profit. The claim that there would be no innovation without capitalism is blatantly false. It's disproven by history, it's disproven by other countries, it's disproven by common sense, and more often, it's disproven by the behavior and actions of the capitalists themselves. If we really care about innovation, we need to dismantle capitalism and throw the profit motive in the trash where it belongs. If you'd like to learn more about how capitalism has innovated all the joy out of work, I highly recommend you check out Happiness at Work on CuriosityStream. It's a fascinating look at just how depressing the modern job really is, and how it got that way. CuriosityStream is an established streaming platform with a solid track record of caring about great educational content and the financial security of those who produce it. They've got thousands of nonfiction titles from some of the best filmmakers in the game. As you probably know, YouTube doesn't treat its creators very well. That's why some of my YouTuber friends and I teamed up to build Nebula, so we don't have to worry about demonetization. As educational creators ourselves, we love CuriosityStream, so we've worked out a deal, where if you sign up for CuriosityStream at the link below, you'll also get access to Nebula, 100% free. That's less than $15 a year for both CuriosityStream and Nebula, which, in my humble opinion, is a pretty great deal. Since most of us are still waiting for the vaccine, why not spend some time learning about fascinating topics on CuriosityStream? Or check out Nebula's original content, including my upcoming series on the resurgence of fascism. You can also watch all my videos as they were intended, ad-free. There really is something for everyone, and by signing up at the link below, you're helping us produce more content without the fear of demonetization. Give CuriosityStream a shot, and get free access to Nebula when you sign up using the link below. It really does help support my channel and educational creators all across YouTube. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, consider subscribing to stay up to date with my latest episodes. If you hated it, go ahead and drop a thumbs down. You can check out my previous episodes by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.